Okay, so we have a few more pages left in We Agnostics. So this will be a shorter video just wrapping up We Agnostics. We are on page 52. When we saw that others solve their problems by a simple reliance upon the spirit of the universe, we had to stop doubting the power of God. Okay, and the question to ask ourselves is, do we see others that solve their problems by reliance on God? When I think about that, I think my conclusion is that's the smaller portion, right? That's not the mainstream. So I see people striving for that, but really to attain that would require spiritual experience. So our ideas did not work, but the God idea did. Now, the example of our ideas did not work is evident in our columns in the fourth step. It is evident by the person who has been convinced that any life run on self can hardly be a success. And when I did the fourth step, it became super clear to me. I'm looking at the pain that I caused others, the pain that I caused myself, were all decisions based on the ego mind. We're all decisions based on self. See, self is conditioned with all sorts of false beliefs. Beliefs such as, I am unworthy, I am not lovable, I'm not deserving, right? So if I'm convinced of that, I'm going to place myself in positions to be hurt. And I saw so much of that when I did my fourth step. So my ideas don't work. On the other hand, if I know, not a belief, but a knowing that I'm an attribute of God, that you are an attribute of God, no longer are the driving forces of unworthiness, unlovable, stupid, in the way, not attractive, all these little things that the ego mind comes to a conclusion of at a very young age are not the driving force. The driving force is, I'm an attribute of God and everyone else is an attribute of God, right? And God doesn't make any junk. So how different would life be? How different would self-esteem be? Confidence, faith, all of that. Okay, and we get there through a very, very thorough inventory. So this first paragraph is power packed. It's power packed. It just touches on so many fundamental ideas in working our steps. So the Wright brothers' almost childish faith that they could build a machine which would fly was the mainspring of their accomplishment. This is simply an analogy. Without that, nothing could have happened, right? We agnostics and atheists were sticking to the idea that self-sufficiency, right? The unawakened state, guiding our life by the guidance of the ego mind, would solve our problems. And what, check your own experience, did it? Right? This is not a lack of intelligence. This is not a lack of wisdom. This is a spiritual matter. I'm guiding my life through self, through the ego mind, which is conditioned with all sorts of false ideas, really, really negative ideas. Or are we seeking to be guided by our creator? So what about the belief that you could come into a new way of life, right? Are you putting that into action? So if the new way of life idea is basically, you know, the peace that comes with step 9, the promises of step 9, to live at perfect peace and ease. What if, with the belief that that's possible, what actions are you demonstrating to show that that belief is the new way of life possible for you, right? Remember when the Wright brothers started doing all this airplane stuff, there was stuff in the newspaper and all over the place saying it was impossible, that God had reserved flight for birds. Everyone around them is saying, no, 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 this isn't possible. But they put the belief that it was possible into action. So it's kind of the same thing here. Perhaps your ego mind is saying, oh, no, it's not possible to know that God is, to really change how I think about myself, how I think about others, right? Page 27, a revolution in thinking. You know, have people been saying that to us our whole life? You know, not in my alcoholic home. There was no spiritual lexicon, right? So we're talking about something that could be absolutely radical to the ego mind. And we just need to take the action. Just need to take the action. Doesn't matter what I think about it. The truth exists despite what I think about it. So let's have some faith and start taking this action. So logic is great stuff. We liked it. We still like it. Alcoholics love it, right? It is not by chance we were given the power to reason, to examine the evidence of our senses, and to draw conclusions. This is one of man's magnificent attributes. We agnostically inclined would not feel satisfied with a proposal which does not lend itself to a reasonable approach and interpretation. Hence, we are at pains to tell why we think our present faith is reasonable, why we think it more sane and logical to believe than not to believe, why we say our former thinking was soft and mushy when we threw up our hands in doubt and said, we don't know. So the process of examination is one of man's magnificent attributes. Now we're talking about a next level here in the program about reliance on our mind. We've already established throughout the book that the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than in his body. And my best thinking got me to the end of the doom curve, right? So, but on page 86, on the second paragraph, it makes this statement. It says, under these circumstances, we can employ our mental faculties with assurance. After all, God gave us brains to use. So what are these circumstances that they're talking about, right, on page 86? Well, let's go over to the book on page 86. Sorry, I didn't have it open. I'm almost there. Okay. When we retire at night, we constructively review our day. Were we resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid? Do we owe an apology? Have we kept something to ourselves which should be discussed with another person at once? Were we kind and loving towards all? What could we have done better? Were we thinking of ourselves most of the time, or were we thinking of what we could do for others, of what we could pack into the stream of life? But we must be careful not to drift into worry, remorse, or morbid reflection, for that would diminish our usefulness to others. After making our review, we ask for God's forgiveness and imagine what corrective measures should be taken. And when we wake up, right, on awakening, let us think about the day ahead. We consider our plans for the day, but before we begin, we ask God to direct our thinking, especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. Under these conditions, we can employ our mental faculties with assurance. Okay, so that's the direction there. We invite God in, right? We ask for direction, especially that be divorced from self. And under those conditions, we can rely on our mind. And what we'll learn later in step 11 is something called the sixth sense. And what that is how we get better and better at receiving direction, receiving knowledge. Okay. I'm not going to talk more about that until we get to step 11. So when we became alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis, wait a minute, hold on a second. Whose crisis is this? I thought it was all my mom's fault. My mom, the drug addict, the alcoholic, wasn't it her fault? Hold on a second. It says crushed by a self-imposed crisis we could not postpone or evade. No matter what, we are responsible, right? We are responsible for ourselves, even if we've been wrongly harmed as children by the adults around us. We still have to take responsibility for this thing called self. It is not my fault that my ego, that myself was conditioned with all sorts of garbage, but it is my responsibility to do the work to get out of it, right? So the thing about this is that the game is rigged. We're backed into a corner with alcoholism. We don't have a choice. We have to or we die. That's where we're at. So we could no longer postpone or evade. We had to fearlessly face the proposition that God is everything or he is nothing. God is or he isn't. What was our choice to be? Right? So it doesn't, courage, I just want to mention this, that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is fear is present and I'm going to do it anyway. Okay. Arrived at this point. Okay. The point. Let's look at page 59. What is the point? I wish I wrote down the paragraph. 59, 59. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I'm taking too long on this. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not finding it fast enough, and I feel okay. I'm sorry. Here it is. Half measures availed us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We asked his protection and care with complete abandon. So that coupled with the prior slide, which says God is everything or he is nothing. This is the point that we're at. All right. So this next part is super fun. So arrived at this point, we were squarely confronted with the question of faith. We couldn't duck the issue. Some of us had already walked far over the bridge of reason toward the desired shore of faith. The outlines and the promise of the new land had brought luster to tired eyes and fresh courage to flagging spirits. Friendly hands had stretched out in welcome. We were grateful that reason had brought us so far, but somehow we couldn't quite step ashore. Perhaps we had been leaning too heavily on reason that last mile, and we did not like to lose our support. So one thing I just really love to point out here is that if we're just worshiping the God of reason, right? If all we have is our ability to reason, and that's where we're coming with our conclusions around this thing called God, which is invisible, right? Then we just have faith in reason. But the person didn't make reason. They didn't write the computer program. They just were existing one day and had this computer program at their fingertips. So they're still putting their faith in something invisible. People put 100% of their faith into it, not knowing where it came from. So that's illogical. So here we go. We have the shore of reason, right? And as an agnostic, for me, as far as I could get was, it's impossible to know if God exists. That's where I stood. Dying of alcoholism. Well, maybe by reading the book, sticking around the program a little bit, I can create a little bridge. I can get a little bit farther, right? By seeing people who are sober, drug addicts who are sober. Perhaps I could get a little farther. But I need to get over here to a spiritual experience, to a knowing, to move from a belief to a knowing that there is, beyond any doubt, a higher power. And here requires a leap of faith. It is a jump from the heart. It is a leap of faith. The brain is just a computer. It's not going to be able to take you all the way. So there's a scene in a movie. We got Indiana Jones. I watched this movie about 2 weeks ago again. I watch it every time that we get through this part in the big book. And I love this scene. You've got to look it up. So he is faced with having to cross this, there's nothing here but just like feet, thousands of feet of dropping into the abyss, into death, really. And he has to walk across. He has no choice. He has to walk across. And you can see here in this particular image, he grabs his heart and he closes his eyes and he's taking a leap of faith through his heart. And as he walks, the bridge appears. The bridge comes under his feet and he safely gets to the other side. This is a perfect analogy for what we are doing here in the program. So a leap of faith is defined as an act of believing on or attempting something whose existence or outcome cannot be proved. That lines up perfectly with the Agnostics definition, which is impossible to know if God exists, right? So fear is a thought created by your own mind. We're scaring ourselves, right? It's time to prove that these thoughts are wrong, and that has a requirement of courage. It means I'm going to take action even though that the fear is present. I'm going to do this even if I'm terrified, right? There are no wimps on the spiritual path. I don't think you would call Indiana Jones a wimp, right? Or a Jedi a wimp. That's what we are doing here. So facing this fear, walking through this fear, results in the abolition of fear. That's how we get rid of it. Not facing the fear results in its continuation. So we have to be Jedi warriors. So that was not natural, but let us think a little more closely. Without knowing it, had we not been brought to where we stood by a certain kind of thing? Did we not believe in our own reasoning? Right? So if we don't have faith in God, then we only have faith in our own power of reason, not knowing where it came from. And remember the definition of obsession. Obsession is a persistent, reoccurring thought that does not respond to reason. So the obsession is running the show, right? The obsession is more powerful than reason. We need a power greater than ourselves, greater than obsession, greater than reason. And the textbook gives you the exact steps to take to gain access to it, which is deep within you. It's always been there. It's been there from the womb. We've just been oblivious to it. We've not had access to it. And the steps are a process of facing and removing those obstacles so we can experience the great reality within. Did we not have confidence in our ability to think? What was that but a sort of faith? Yes, we had been faithful, objectively faithful to the God of reason. So in one way or another, we discovered that faith had been involved all the time, right? But for the alcoholic, reason is not enough. Whew, what a state of mental goose flesh that used to bring on. Had we not variously worshipped people, sentiment, things, money, and ourselves, and then with a better motive, have we not worshipfully beheld the sunset, the sea, or a flower? Who of us had not loved something or somebody? How much of these feelings, these loves, these worships have to do with pure reason? Little or nothing, we saw at last. Were not these things the tissue out of which our lives were constructed? Did not these feelings, after all, determine the course of our existence? It was impossible to say that we had no capacity for faith, for love, or for worship. In some form or other, we had been living by faith and little else. Imagine life without faith, where nothing left but pure reason. It wouldn't be life. But we believed in life. Of course we did. We could not prove life in the sense that we could prove a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points, yet there it was. Could we still say the whole thing was nothing but a mass of electrons created out of nothing, meaning nothing, whirling onto a destiny of nothingness? Of course we couldn't. The electrons themselves seem more intelligent than that, or at least so the chemist said. Hence, we saw that reason isn't everything. Neither is reason, as most of us use it, entirely dependable. Okay. Now we are going to go on to page 55, which we already have gone over the slides for. Okay, so neither is reason, as most of us use it, entirely dependable, though it emanates from our best minds. What about people who proved that man could never fly? Yet we had been seeing another kind of flight, a spiritual liberation from this world, people who rose above their problems. They said God made these things possible and we only smiled. We had seen spiritual release, but we like to tell ourselves it wasn't true. Now here's the location of God. Actually, we were fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child, who does that leave out? No one. Is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured, right? Blocked by calamity. Calamity is the trauma that you've experienced or that you observe others experience. By pomp, pride, ego, worship of other things. We just talked about the worship of other things on the prior page. But in some form or other, it is there. For faith in a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are as facts as old as man himself. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup, just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. He was as much a fact as we were. We found the great reality deep down within us, and in the last analysis, it is only there that he may be found. What does the word only mean? I was always taught that God was up in the sky, not inside me or others. We can only clear the ground a bit if our testimony helps sweep away prejudice, enables you to think honestly, encourages you to search diligently within yourself, right? That's the introspection part of it. That's the working the steps, taking an inventory. Then, if you wish, you can join us on the broad highway. With this attitude, you cannot fail. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come to you. In this book, you will read the experience of a man who thought he was an atheist. His story is so interesting that some of it should be told now. His change of heart was dramatic, convincing, and moving. Our friend was a minister's son. He attended church school where he became rebellious at what he thought was an overdose of religious education. For years thereafter, he was dogged by trouble and frustration, business failure, insanity, fatal illness, suicide. These calamities, right? What blocks you off from God? Calamities. In his immediate family, embittered and depressed him. Impending mental and physical collapse brought him to the point of self-destruction. Well, one night when he was confined in a hospital, he was approached by an alcoholic who had known a spiritual experience. Who does the approaching? The recovered alcoholic does. Our friend's gorge rose as he bitterly cried out, "If there is a God, he certainly hasn't done anything for me." But later, alone in his room, he asked himself this question: is it possible that all the religious people I have known are wrong? While pondering this, he felt as though he lived in hell. Then, like a thunderbolt, a great thought came and it crowded out all else. Who are you to say there is no God, right? In order to say that, you would have to know every nook and cranny of this universe. That's not possible. This man recounts that he tumbled out of bed to his knees, and in a few seconds, He was overwhelmed by a conviction of the presence of God. It poured over and through him with certainty and majesty, of a great tide at flood. The barriers he had built through the years were swept away. He stood in the presence of infinite power and love. He stepped from bridge to shore. And for the first time, he lived in conscious companionship with his creator. Thus, our friend's cornerstone fixed in place. No later vicissitude had shaken it. His alcoholic problem was taken away. That very night, years ago, it disappeared. Save for a few brief moments of temptation, the thought of drink has never returned, and at such times a great revulsion has risen up in him. Seemingly, he could not drink even if he would. God had restored his sanity. What is this but a miracle of healing? Yet its elements are simple. Circumstances made him willing to believe. He humbly offered himself to his maker. Then he knew, right? He moved from a belief to an experience, from a belief to a knowing. Even so has God restored us all to our right minds. To this man, the revelation was sudden. Some of us grow into it more slowly. And that's the purpose of Appendix 2, right? You know, Bill Wilson had the extended white light experience that you can read on page 120 and pass it on. And a lot of the early members thought they had to have a marked white light experience. But Appendix 2 shows that it can be of the educational variety. And if you study Varieties of Religious Experience with William James, you will get more information on what that means. So this dude also had the white light experience, but some of our members grow into it more slowly. Here's a promise. But he has come to all who have honestly sought him, right? So in order to get that promise, I must understand honesty, practice honesty, right? And honesty is an awareness of where you're at. It's getting honest with yourself and meeting God with that honesty. That's why my early prayers started out with, dear thing that might be there, but I don't believe you are, right? And sought is an action, seeking. That's an action item. It's not a thinking item. It's an action item. And if you want to know what seeking looks like, just think back to a memory. Perhaps you lost some drugs in the carpet or in your bathroom or in your purse or in your car. How vigorously did you seek that, right? There's a promise. When we drew near to him, he disclosed himself to us. For me, that was a pivotal piece of information, because so many times they work the steps through the 12 and 12 with a sponsor, yada, 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 right? And step 2 was writing down what I want my higher power to be. Yeah, that didn't work because it never worked for me. I know it works for others, but it didn't work for me. I had too much of an idealistic idea of what I wanted God to be. It was too far-fetched, right? So instead of me trying to use my alcoholic mind, my ego mind, my biases, my preferences, all of that jazz to try to define the creator of the universe, which is invisible, instead, I took a different approach, which was, oh my gosh, this thing can tell me what it is, right? I just need to move away the obstacles between me and it will reveal itself to me. And when you read about the attributes, there are attributes of the spiritual experience. One of them is ineffability, ineffable, meaning that you are going to know things that are incapable of being put into words. And that is exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened, is I received information that's impossible to put into words, but now I know. Now I know. There is nothing anyone can ever say to me. There's nothing that could ever happen to make me think that God does not exist. Okay, so that is the end of the chapter called We Agnostics, and it's about the logical line of reasoning to get one to open their mind to a new idea of God. Okay, parking lot is open.
Okay. Thank you. I have a few questions. First question, I know we've covered it in the past, but I can't find it in my notes, so I got to post it and I'm going to write it on the post-it. The Spiritual Experience book. What is that book called again?
Varieties of Religious Experience by William James.
I'm writing this down. William James, Variety of Spiritual Experiences. Okay.
Okay, but like that book was written in the late 1800s. It's a tough read. It's a scholarly book.
Mhm.
So I recommend getting it on audio.
Okay. Okay. I
I
could,
listened to it on audio 3 times over.
okay. Yeah, I wrote that down too. I got that. Um, then my next question is, so it was when we were talking about page 27, Revolution of Thinking, taking the action. And my question is, what is the action? Because I feel like I'm taking action, but I know that I'm missing an action, some action. So my question is, and I think this is pertaining to, asking God, what is God? What action is it that I take?
Sure. Well, the actions in our steps, right?
Okay,
Which is prayer, meditation, introspection, and service.
prayer, introspection, and service. Okay, okay. Um, and then you touched on step 10. And there was a period of my sobriety, the first 7 years of my sobriety, they weren't this deep as we've gone, but they were good years. And during those years, I did a 10th step at night. I don't do that anymore. Do you suggest that perhaps maybe I begin to do that now?
Of course.
Right,
Yeah. All we have is now.
right. Yeah, because that was really helpful for me. Really, really helpful for me to do a step 10 before I went to bed and review my day. Um, and then the next question, ask God to direct our thoughts and our thinkings upon awakening. This is a silly question, perhaps, because I should know it, but it's been a long time. What page is that on again? Upon awakening.
I believe that's page 86. Let me turn there real quick.
Okay.
Yep, it's page 86, the second real paragraph.
Okay.
And I just want to say this talks about asking God to direct our thinking, especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, and self-seeking motives. There's also the fear prayer, which I use all the time, right? Because fear tends to make decisions for me,
Mm-hmm.
for other alcoholics.
Yeah.
So asking God to come, direct our thinking and remove our fear, I use that along with this. I need to get all of that out.
Right, right, right. And the fear prayer is on page.
I believe, tell I'm kind of rusty, right?
That's okay. I'm more rusty.
Okay. It's around the 4 step.
Yes. Yes. That
Uh,
sounds familiar.
it is page 68.
Okay. All right. I got that. I wrote that down.
We ask him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what he would have us be.
Right. Right. Um, my next question. reason, no relying God on, relying on. I wrote this as a statement instead of a question, so I don't know what I'm not following my own question, but oh, well, maybe this is it. So, relying on reason as opposed to relying on God. Um, I guess the question would be, what are some things, some faith-based things? And I think that that might be that slide that you shared with me. I think it might have to do with that, or it could connect with this certainly. But I guess my question is, how can I make sure with my human ability, and I can be a perfectionist, but the question is, how can I make sure as much as humanly possible that I'm relying on God as opposed to relying on reason, because I rely on reason a lot, and as we discussed, it fails me a lot.
Yeah, I hear you. So, and since this spiritual experience happened to me, I use my brain, my ability to reason only for my work, right?
Right,
Like when I'm in performing work, it's like a calculator, it's like a tool that I
right,
use. Um, but for life, for navigating through life, it has failed me perfectly.
right, exactly.
So that is more about the sixth sense,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes, yep. Right,
So
through meditation, and I'm an avid meditator. Um, and so for life, relying on God would be related to the 11th step, maybe the 10th step, and then also upon awakening and the fear prayer.
right.
Can I connect those? Is that accurate to connect those?
Yes.
Okay. And then the upon awakening, I'm writing this down, awakening, and then the fear prayer. Yeah. Just because I would like, these are the things that have failed me in the past, which inevitably, after many years, led to a horrific relapse. Um, and then so then next question, actions. He has come to all who have honestly sought him, and through actions, prayers, 10, 11. Is there anything else that I may have missed, you know, when we talk?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, 10, 11, and 12 are the maintenance steps. The
right.
heavy lift is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Wait, what was that? Oh, 10, I
So,
heard 10, 10, 11, and 12, but what was the thing you said before?
yeah, 10, 11, and 12 are maintenance steps.
Right.
The heavy lift is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Okay, got it. Okay. Okay. I got that. And last question. Um, and I suppose as I'm asking these, the answers are actually coming, but since I wrote it down, I'll ask it anyway. How do I let God tell me who it is? He is, she is. How do I let God tell me who God is?
Yeah, I don't think you're going to have to do too much work on that. Just the same way that you don't have to monitor your breathing or your
Right,
blood flow. Like there's things that are happening automatically in your body
right,
that you're not monitoring and making happen.
right.
So your job is to exert your will to work these steps.
Mm-hmm.
So you can exert your will and plan and do everything that you can to work, take other people through the big book, to do your fourth step, your fifth step.
Mm-hmm.
Then God does for us what we can't do for ourselves, which is reveal himself to us.
Right, right.
And it's going to be a unique experience that only you understand.
Right. Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And I have a feeling for me that there's been so much calamity that has, and I didn't even realize it really until we got into we agnostics. There's been so much calamity that has made me angry at God. And coming from a place of having like a burning bush experience in '09 to in 2019, the 2018 calamity really began to take place. And I began to really not believe, just have a lot of biases about this God. Like, how could you? How could you, God? How could you? Kind of thing. And I never ever worked through any of that, ever. And so I look forward to working through that. And a lot of it, God didn't do. Everybody has free will. These are the actions of people, not the actions of God, you know, perhaps, as I say to comfort myself.
Yeah. No, I get it. One of the biggest obstacles that I had was, why would God allow such amount of violence to happen to children and animals?
Right.
There are children on our planet and animals on our planet that are absorbing an incredible amount of suffering and violence. And that, it weighs heavy on my heart. And then it'd be like, I go to a meeting and it'd be like, well, ask God to keep you sober today. Like, what? Why would he even care when he allows children to be the victims of sex crimes or slavery or factory farming, like horrific things?
Totally. And I'm so selfish, I've been pissed the fuck off at at my mother and the things that she's still doing, and angry that people have passed away in my life that were good and loving people, and yet my mother still stands. I'm like, what kind of God would allow a terrorist to still be a terror, and yet take away my grandma who raised me, and take away my stepmom who loved me? And those are some of my selfish, I suppose, because I have anger on large scale too. Animals, children, similar to what you said, I do. And some of the more personal ones have been like, as people have passed away in my life, people that I loved and that loved me unconditionally, and yet my mother's still around and she's still wreaking havoc. It's just, those are some of the calamities where I'm just like, I don't know, God. I don't know. I don't know what you're doing. I don't get it. I don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and maybe it's not for me to get. Maybe. But those are some of the calamities that not until we've gotten to this section have really been brought to the forefront. And during my meditation in the morning, um that stuff comes up for me, because during the day I compartmentalize in order to get through my day. And then in my quiet time with God, I get a lot of peace. And then that stuff comes up. That stuff comes up, and it comes up in the form of grief. And what it's done it has affected my relationship with God. Very much so.
Yeah.
So those are the end of my parking lot questions, and I
Okay.
very much look forward to moving forward in this study. And so thank you.
Oops.